court is going to declare this unconstitutional. This is a non-starter. And I want to point out that Senator Daschle did do some leading. He shut down Senator Byrd's filibuster because the Democrats didn't want to carry this debate into yet another week.
Well, in defense of Robert Byrd, he said he would not filibuster the resolution. Please continue.
Yeah, he didn't filibuster after 75 votes were lined up against him. Look, the Constitution doesn't recommend any particular language for the declaration of war. All it says is that Congress has the power to declare. They have, in effect, declared war.
How Clintonian can you get?
But
I can get a disgrace.
Clintonian
I want to ask you a question.
Clintonian is the key point, because Mr. Byrd was forcefully, favorably, just like Carl Levin, with Clinton, on these interventions, on the Iraq resolution, on the going into the Balkans and Macedonia and Bosnia and Kosovo.
All right, now
all of a sudden now, with Bush trying to lead this against a legitimate threat, Byrd pulls out the Constitution. He has no credibility.
Excuse me, a legitimate threat. There was some news this week, and that's the CIA letter to the Senate, which pointed out that there is no immediacy to this threat, and that if there is a U.S.-led invasion, that it may well spark Saddam Hussein to use the very weapons that we are trying to prevent.
And they also said the year 2010 for any nuclear power for Iraq. Let's move on. Okay, imminent threat. Democratic Senator Richard Durbin, to his credit, who voted against the resolution, stresses that the United States has always been a defensive nation. We have not been an offensive nation. He faults the resolution for lacking a provision that would require that the threat that would permit the president to use such power, unlimited power, that the threat be imminent.
Historically, we have said it is not enough that you have a weapon that might hurt us. Think of 50 years of Cold War, when the Soviet Union had missiles poised and pointed at us. It's not enough that you just possess those weapons. We will watch to see if you make any effort toward hurting anyone in the United States, any of our citizens, or our territory.
Republican Senator John Kyle, who voted for the resolution, sharply disagrees, saying it is impossible to discern when imminence kicks in.
It is virtually impossible for us to know when a threat is imminent, a threat posed by a regime such as Saddam Hussein's or a group of terrorists. These people do not announce their threats in advance. They conceal their intentions as well as their capabilities, and it is very difficult for us to know that precise moment at which the threat is imminent.
Who's right, Durbin or Kyle? Is Kyle right in saying that you really cannot discern when imminence kicks in?
Kyle is exactly right. He's essentially using the Kissinger technology argument, which nullifies all these other, Treaty of Westphalia arguments. But the key thing about John Kyle is, with the departure of Senator Phil Gramm, Senator John Kyle now becomes one of the major, if not the major, conservative leader in the Senate. He was the point guy.
Well, we know all that. I want to know whether we can demand that be an imminent threat.
Why did JFK bother to get those aerial pictures of the missiles in Cuba if he didn't need some kind of evidence? This is a big shift. This is a big shift away. Saddam Hussein's past behavior does not show any threats against the United States, any terrorism, any suitcases smuggled into our country. All he's done is lob missiles over to Israel. Now, this is very true, but he has not threatened this country. You do know what an imminent threat is. It is not there. We are moving American history in a different direction.
You are moving it. You are moving it.
In the 21st century now, we'll move back to the 19th.
Let's make sure we understand. Just quiet, please.
Baghdad is not the rational player that Moscow was.
Oh, sure, and Khrushchev was, right?
Everybody knows.
Khrushchev was.
I have to admonish you. Please relinquish.
Yes, sir.
This opens the door. This seems like a minor point, perhaps, to some people, but it opens the door to unilateral strikes and preemptive strikes, which is the whole dynamic that so disturbs people.
That's what Senator Durbin was getting at, this whole doctrine of preemptive strikes, which, in fact, every U.S. president has had. It is better left unstated.
All right. Yes, but many senators who voted yes on the resolution also criticized and qualified their support, as did Senator Hillary Clinton of New York.
A vote for it is not a vote to rush to war. It is a vote that puts awesome responsibility in the hands of our president. And we say to him, use these powers wisely and as a last resort.
Senator Clinton says that the resolution should have been stronger in its emphasis on UN inspectors and listening to them and letting Blix control the action instead of trying to slip around and avoid him or nullify him or treat him the way that Clinton initially wanted to treat Monica, undercut him.
Undercut.
And she also said that diplomacy must be stressed more than it has. Yeah. You think this administration is delinquent on both counts?
No, they're moving at the diplomatic front at the same time that they're preparing militarily. I thought, and most of the liberals who went with the president, felt the need to make a few statements about, now, you be careful, Mr. President, do the right job. I thought the most interesting thing that Hillary said was that one of the reasons that she ended up supporting our president, as she used the words, was her 8 years of experience in the White House. If you look carefully at her speech, and I think she's used that phrase once before, but she was saying, based on her experience in the White House, she understands the demands on a president, and that was one of the things that she identified as flipping her over to support the president. I thought that was pretty interesting.
Let me let Ellen in here. I want to ask you a question. Are you comfortable with all this power being entrusted to any president?
I think President Bush uses the trust me analogy with virtually everything he does, from the tax cut and the economy to war making.
And you can trust him. All right.
But no Democrat who has presidential aspirations could afford to be on the no side.
I want to ask you something, but only after I read this list of senators who dissented. 21 Democrats. They are Akaka, Bingaman, Boxer, Byrd, Conrad, Corzine, Dayton, Durbin, Feingold, Graham, Inouye, Kennedy, Leahy, Levin, Mikulski. Any surprises there? Well, we have more. Murray, Reed, Sarbanes, Stabenow, Wellstone, Wyden, one Republican, Chafee of Rhode Island, and one independent, Jeffers. What does this list tell you of naysayers to this resolution? I ask you.
I'm semi-surprised at Graham of Florida, but only semi. I think the more interesting point is that this resolution picked up roughly 20 more senators than the resolution in 1990 on the eve of the First Persian Gulf War. And I want to say that Bush's power curve is so strong, John. You take a look at the Pew poll that just came out. He's up to 90%. Let me just make this point. On regime change, on first strike, on this war, Bush has the full support of this country.
Depends on how you word it. Depends on how you phrase the question.
People are very ambivalent in this country about this, and he has manipulated the fear factor to the point where a lot of people
we got to get on. Quick point.
But on that list of names, you didn't find a single Democrat who's interested in running for president. You did find a Republican who may well switch if the Republicans take over the Senate.
If they voted their conscience, if they had voted their conscience in the United States Senate, how many would have dissented, Eleanor? Would you care to tell me?
There would have been a lot more no's, and there would have been more Republicans on that list.
Would it have been the majority? So we have pusillanimity writ large in that Senate. Is that what you're saying?
Let me point out the most interesting thing. None of the leadership of the Democratic Party voted against, but the activist base of the Democratic Party is against.
So you have this division.
So what's your point? What's your point?
There's a huge division in the Democratic Party between its leaders who can't afford to break with the country and with Bush and the activist base.
Who voted for?
Who voted for? The Democratic base, not just the liberal activists, are ambivalent about this war. A lot of people will support the resolution.
There's also ambivalence among the Republican base.
Let me ask Tony this question to see how good he is. Who voted against the resolution, and it will cost him his Senate seat?
Paul Wellstone.
Wellstone, maybe. Let's hope not. Issue 2, guns or butter?
Winning this war on terror and protecting the homeland, making sure our kids get educated, we ought to set priorities. But we ought not to spend beyond those priorities.
How can it be essential that we go to war prior to the election, but absolutely fine to wait until after the election before we take any action to deal with the economy?
To date, it's been guns all the way. But now, with Iraq resolutions in the UN and Congress, inspectors at Saddam's door, and an international coalition hopefully in the making, butter issues, starting with the economy, may be in the ascension. The question is, are they in the ascension, I ask you?
Well, I think the economy is going to be an issue. There's no question about that. The funny part about the issue is I don't see the Democrats really taking advantage of it, even though they're the ones who want to keep raising it. The economy is growing at a subpar, slow, tepid rate. 3%, it ought to be growing at 6%. And, of course, the stock market, at least until the last couple of days, has been a shambles. But I was at the conference this morning, this Democratic conference, the so-called summit meeting.
Were you sitting with any members of the Congress?
Yes, I was in the thick of it. And,
did you talk to Mr. Daschle?
I did not.
Did you talk to Mr. Gephardt?
I talked to Mr. Gephardt.
What did he have to say?
I talked to Mr. Corzine.
Did they ask for your wisdom?
They don't. Yes, they did, but they don't have a party position. Some people in the party want to roll the tax cut back, and then you hear this vague stuff.
What's the Bush economic plan?
Well, now this.
What's the Bush economic plan? Would you tell me?
At this point, they don't have an agenda either. That's why this is such a strange thing. And here's the point about Bush. He's got 3 weeks now until the general election. I don't think Iraq is going to help them that much in these individual races. And I think they should stick with the investor tax cut that they proposed and then dropped. I really think that's what they should.
So you agree with 3/4 of the nation that both the Congress and the President ought to be devoting more energy to the economy?
Yes, I do.
Well, people are getting their 401k statements, and the Democrats are calling them 201k
Well,
statements.
I know. I actually coined that phrase about 2 months
all right.
ago.
Well, thank you for your wisdom. But if you go race by race, the top issues are not Iraq.
I
it's
agree.
the economy,
I agree.
Social Security,
I agree.
education, and affordable health care.
But there's no clear
it's not a voting issue yet. It makes no sense.
Wait a second. Things are going to change, though. I think this is one other reason why the Democrats voted so heavily in favor of Bush's proposition to get Iraq off the table. Because once we start talking about domestic issues now, Democrats go up, and Bush is on.
Let me ask Tony a question, and the question relates to the dynamic of a midterm election. Who usually stays home?
Other than the activist base of the parties, and people who are less informed and who are not as strongly affiliated with either party.
That's true in any election. I'm talking about a midterm election. The people who are content stay home. The people who are irritated, they vote in large numbers.
The people who are motivated come to elect. They can be motivated either positively
now what
or
motivates
negatively.
them more than the present state of the economy? Will you tell me? We're talking turnout here, and if you talk a turnout, that the catalyst of which is dissatisfaction with the economy. Bear in mind now, the positive track and the negative track. What do they call that?
The right track numbers.
The wrong track numbers today are higher than the right track numbers.
And there's also never been as big a gap between there's also never been as big a gap between the presidential approval and the wrong track numbers. So those numbers are ambiguous. Let me answer your question, by the way, because although in theory perhaps you might be right, the polling being done now shows that the Republican base is more energized than the Democratic base.
Why?
I don't know, but that's what the polls show.
War.
Whatever it is, right now, while this is
where did you see that?
I've seen it I saw it in a poll this week.
No, what poll did you see it in?
I don't remember.
Read everything. You're the editor over there.
I read a lot of polls.
Let me say this. What I'm saying, the general principle is if you're unhappy, you go to the polls and you protest. And there are a lot of people unhappy. So turnout could tell whether or not.
Turnout could, but let me make this point. Bush is embarking on a 2-week campaign tour, and one hears from the White House he is going to make an economic response to Daschle and
You think it's going to stick?
I think it's a good defensive measure, and also there is still a chance he will propose an investor's tax cut. So
hey, I have a question.
Nullified a lot of these disadvantages.
Yeah,
really.
That's right. There's no
it's not the worst economy since Herbert Hoover. You have 3% growth, for goodness sake. That's idiotic. How can you say this is the worst economy?
Let her finish quickly.
The biggest drop in the stock market in percentage terms
since FDR.
Herbert Hoover.
All right, exit question.
That's the biggest unemployment payoff since the last recession.
The fact. Since 37-38, the president was FDR. Other than that, you got the story right. You just missed the president.
Exit question. Is there such a thing as a reverse coattails? Meaning, if Bush's handling of the economy is foremost in voters' minds, it could hurt all Republican candidates. Is that a possibility? Quickly, exit question. Yes or no?
I don't think so.
You don't think so? Is it a possibility?
It's a possibility there, but it hasn't happened yet.
Do you think so?
Everything's possible. There's no evidence of it.
I think coattails in both directions are overblown these days, and that is to the good of, or the relief of a lot of Republicans in Congress
Clarence,
right now.
You're right on the mark, and welcome back. Issue 3, games people play.
Remember the all-American maxim, anyone can grow up to be president? Now, maybe anyone can. A new reality television series called American Candidate on the Fox Cable Network will showcase the slate of 2004 presidential hopefuls. Contenders of all ethnic and ideological stripes and from any and all backgrounds will be first winnowed by a panel of experts. Then they will be presented to the viewing public in a succession of survivor-like contests of stamina and cunning, particularly political debates and other Ramada-Inn rubber chicken circuit politicking events. Aspirants will also be faced with ethical choices, such as whether or not to go negative against his or her opponent. Viewers will act as the electorate, voting weakest link candidates off the show. The final episode is slated for broadcast around July 4, 2004, when the winner will be chosen from the finalists in an American candidate convention on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. After that, the victor will be on his or her own. That means actually getting on the ballot in all 50 states and raising funds and hoping that the free publicity lasts.
Question, just let us suppose that some charismatic soul surfaces through this program. Could a political star be born? I ask you, Tony.
No, my first doubt is that anyone much is going to watch. I understand why people watch reality TV when they're on an island eating, cockroaches or something. But why would you want to watch airsats politicians pretending to be politicians?
Well, that's a different question. My question was, what you need is viewers, and you need a measure of talent, charisma. And it's happened before. It happened on Larry King in 1992 with Ross Perot. You remember that?
I remember Perot, yeah.
Ross Perot came into prominence.
And he also had $3 billion to spend on it.
It also happened when someone gave a speech called Rendezvous with Destiny. Who was that?
It was Ronald Reagan.
Ronald Reagan.
In September of 1964. And he subsequently, 2 years later, ran for governor as a Republican, and it took him from 64 until 1980 to get elected president. I don't think you go from being a character on television in June to being considered a presidential contender.
What about being governor of California?
Tony, please lighten up. I mean, you're an expert on history, but think outside the box here now. Look at Jesse Ventura. He surprised everybody by springing up from that showbiz background because he provided the alternative.
We're
talking about for president of the United States.
My friend, why are there so many non-voters out there? Because people aren't reaching out to them, because they don't have anybody on that array up there that brings them in. This is a process. Look, every network may have its own candidate by 2008.
Is the public really interested in political competition?
I turn my time over
We have a hard enough time getting people to watch the real thing, but it seems to me if you get Martin Sheen to run, he'd get a lot of votes. And second, if you come up with a candidate here and whoever is behind in the presidential contest and wants to drop out at the last minute, we might have a fill-in.
What's it going to be?
I would have bought into that except for the Martin Sheen part, but I am interested in this one notion that nowadays in elections, if your starting pitcher candidate doesn't work, you can put a relief pitcher in. So why shouldn't Fox give
What's it going to be? Is it going to be a blockbuster like Survivor or a ratings bust like Big Brother?
It's going to be a bust.
Predictions, Kudlow.
It now appears, regrettably, that the Justice Department will not prosecute the board of directors of Enron Corporation, which I think are very culpable.
Some sort of inspection regime will get underway in Iraq.
Tony.
Daschle failed to pass any Homeland Security bill out of the Senate. There will be 3 different votes, possibly, and none will get 50%. And as a result, that will become a moderate issue during the remaining election season.
Clarence?
The Security Council and the UN, after all the gnashing of teeth, will cave and support Bush, much like Congress has.
Yes.
What does that mean?
What does that mean? He's got carte blanche. That's what that means. They're going to buy off the French, the Russians, the Germans, because there are things, and the Chinese, there are things they want.
You think he's going to put a consortium? Will there be a consortium?
I think there will be, and I think, John, you got to remember.
Okay. You want my prediction, or you want to hear what you have to say?
Truman and Reagan.
You want to hear what he has to say?
I predict that there will be no war. Next week, the group makes its Senate predictions. Bye-bye.
Make progress every day. Verizon. From power systems that energize our world
to lighting that brightens each day, to technology that keeps us connected, GE is working for people everywhere. That's why we're proud to support the McLaughlin Group.
Broadcast of the McLaughlin Group is made possible by viewers like you and by
the Cleveland law firm of Duvin, Kahn & Hutton. For over 25 years, the lawyers of Duvin, Kahn & Hutton have represented employers nationwide in all aspects of labor and employment law.
a rare blend of wit and wisdom. Stay tuned for Fegler and Friends, coming up next on WVIZ PBS.
In less than a month, Ohioans will go to the polls to cast their vote for the state's next chief executive. What are the major issues facing our state, and where do the candidates stand? Two men who want to be Ohio's governor will face off in Dayton in a debate organized by Ohio's public television and radio stations and three of the state's leading newspapers. Before you cast your vote this November, be sure to watch Debating Ohio, the race for governor. It's a wine lover's dream. The Heinen's WVIZ World Series of Wine, presented by Anthem Blue Cross and Blue Shield. At the grand tastings on Friday, November 8th and Saturday, November 9th, you can sample over 400 world-class wines and delicious hors d'oeuvres while enjoying the ambiance of the Terrace Club at Jacobs Field. Call 1-888-281-WINE today to order your grand tasting tickets, and also ask about the winery dinners and seminars, all part of the 7th Annual Heinen's WVIZ World Series of Wine.
Next time on Nature, join TV correspondent Lynn Scher as she spends some quality time with her favorite four-legged creature.
What a fabulous way to eat breakfast.
That's 1 foot. Sunday at 8 on WVIZ PBS. Ohio Ballet presenting Dracula at E.J. Thomas Hall October 11th and 12th and Playhouse Square October 18th and 19th. Don't miss this gothic tale the New York Times calls ingenious, chilling, horrifying. Ohio Ballet's Dracula. May he never rest in peace.
WVIZ PBS. Idea Stream.
Cleveland's newest landmark is curved Rome and was paid for by one of Cleveland's most colorful billionaires. Singular art and architecture critic Steve Litz and WVIZ reporter David C. Barnett join me to talk about the new Peter B. Lewis building at Case Western Reserve University. But first, what's going on inside the Maple Heights School? What effect is a month-long strike having on the kids' education? Terror in the suburbs of our nation's capital. Was the media wrong to report what may be a key piece of evidence in the investigation? And Tim Couch lashes out at the fans. What rights does the price of a ticket get you? Joining the roundtable this week, Plain Dealer editorial writer Chris Sheridan, 90.3 WCPN reporter Janet Babin, and Mike Walker, executive director of the Partnership for a Safer Cleveland. Well, there seems to be no end in sight for the teacher strike in Maple Heights. This week, about 100 kids walked out frustrated over what is, or maybe more importantly, what isn't, happening in the classroom. The State Board of Education is concerned about that, too. They had a team in town looking at what kind of job the substitute teachers are doing. The strike is now in its second month. And Chris Sheridan, we've had tough strikes in Cleveland before, but why is this one so hard to settle?
I think the difference between this one and some of the other ones is that the people involved can't let go of the anger at things that have happened during the strike. One of the reasons that in 1996 Cleveland was able to avoid a walkout was that eventually saner heads prevailed over those who really wanted to bury the union or screw the mayor. And in this case, the wiser heads are speaking, but they're not being listened to.
Why don't you recap, for those who might have missed it, some of the things that have happened during the strike?
Well, we've had various suits and countersuits seeking access to salary information. Both sides' websites have published the teachers' salaries and the administrators' salaries. There's a third website that has, or has had, it's down now, a picture calling one of the officials Satan. The teachers have picketed outside of homes rather than merely around school grounds. The district has sought to restrain and successfully restrain the number of people who could picket at certain sites. It's just not been particularly friendly.
The Teamsters couldn't be doing a better job than these guys do. The website is the new weapon of warfare, apparently. So.
Indeed.
Yeah. Got to take it, Miss Janet?
Well, I just think that it's been so vicious that really there's going to be a call, if this thing ever does end, for some preemptive stuff to be done. In other words, why not talk? I mean, how could this go on so long? Why not begin to talk sooner about possible problems and outline solutions sort of before the fact to help, quell the number of days that teachers end up striking?
Were there strikes in the old days, Michael? You're almost as old as I am.
There were, but I think Chris did a wonderful job, at least outlining some things about what prevents these things from being elongated. The concern I have is how kids have actually been used in this by both sides as well. Obviously, the ability to be disruptive in the class, in terms of what substitutes are doing. I mean, the report's going to come out from the state. It's going to say they're meeting the standards. There's no doubt about that. They've tried to do that, but in terms of what the students need, are not even really being on the table here. I think Chris is right about the baggage. I mean, it's vicious. Yeah. And the thing that really is, the issue here is it really about the way we fund schools, and are we back to this notion of what really happens for districts all around? I mean, understand, there are going to be teacher strikes again in other districts, and this notion of salaries and so forth. But here it has become very personal, and the tactics are very similar. Now we're videotaping people at the picket line. We're limiting. We're going to court about the process. But the sad thing, again, is really the students are being hurt over and over again in these things.
Before we get into funding, and I do want to get into funding, what about this task force that came down to see how the substitute teachers are doing? Have you heard anything on that?
Not as yet. I think that Mike is probably right, that ultimately they'll conclude that the standard is being met. But I think that the big lesson that the kids are getting is how childish the adults can act. A colleague who experienced a strike in a western suburb 10 years ago said, there was a rule of thumb that for every day of a strike, it takes a year for the community to really get past the bitterness. Cleveland, 4 years after their non-strike, there were still bitter feelings between the teachers and the administration. And, I mean, given the length of this one, we're in decades now in terms of hurt feelings.
Well, who's right and who's wrong?
I think that there's a bit of each. I think that the teachers are right to be bummed that they're the least paid in the county, and the district is right when it says, look, we don't have the money to pay very much more. And that is sort of a standard conflict in a labor negotiation. The problem is that from there we've gone off onto points and issues that really have very little to do with the contract. Who's related to whom between the board, and who works at the county auditor's office, and attacks on the negotiating tactics rather than the content.
Well, these teachers had been underpaid, hadn't they?
Absolutely. They're the lowest paid in the county, by far.
So what about Mike's point, Janet? Does it all go back to funding again? Are we still wrestling over the school funding issues here?
Well, I think that this is just one more example of proof that the funding needs to change. I mean, there have been how many levies in Maple Heights since 1981? And, some of them passed, most of them failed. But why do we need to keep going back to taxpayers to have levies, sometimes 3 times in a year if they fail? I think that just points to a huge problem, you're right, in the way we fund schools.
My take on Maple Heights,
it's got to be a different way.
I haven't been out there recently, but I think, as I recall it, it's an aging suburb. I think there are a lot of older folks.
Transient, a lot of transient.
And it's getting poorer every year.
Yes.
And so all these things don't bode ill for levies passing.
And a lot of senior citizens. And I was thinking, too, that I think that really schools need to become more than just schools. If we could find a way to engage everyone at in classrooms in some way or another, if you go out to the school. Because, I mean, I think there's statistics that would prove that the more you're involved in school, the more you're willing to vote in favor of a levy. So if there were a way to get seniors into schools just for, you know, some kind of community day or something, I think that there might be a better shot. But, you know, the whole funding issue just needs to be addressed.
Let's leave it there and hope we don't have to talk about it again, because let's hope by the time we reconvene, this will be settled. But is there any end in sight at all?
I don't think there's any end in sight, and I think that while certainly the finances have exacerbated the conflict in Maple Heights, I think that the personalities involved are a much greater problem.
Well, we'll leave it there and move on. The Potomac Basin sniper may have struck again Friday. 7 people are confirmed victims of this gunman who kills randomly and with deadly accuracy. The latest shooting happened at a gas station in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Witnesses saw a white van speeding toward the interstate. And this has been a tough case to crack, and police lashed out at a Washington TV station for reporting that investigators found the tarot death card at the scene of one shooting.
And if it's decided that Channel 9 is going to investigate this case, then so be it. So be it.
Now, they're getting frustrated, and that's frustration speaking, because the reporters can't report anything that is not released to them by the law enforcement agencies. So it's not like they were reading minds here, reading tarot cards and coming up with this stuff. What's your take on it, Mike?
Well, first of all, you know, the challenge you have is how do you manage the information for, I think, the investigation. The question is, how do you balance this? And here's what we have. You know, think about this. They're getting almost 4,000 tips. And what the chief there, and I worry about it because, you know what I think has happened? You know, we always talk about personalities. He's personalized this challenge, this investigation. I mean, he comes out.
The chief has.
The chief has. And I mean, I feel very sadly about the situation he's in. But think about it. Now we've got chiefs in 4 communities, and it's going to get larger. And who's managing this investigation? How do you manage that information? But the question of news and information is, for what end? You know, the reality is the shell casing found with additional information leads to the problem of this. When I get tips, I've got to filter out the good ones and the bad ones. The more I know, the more I can filter better. The problem we have, and this is what would be contended is, now that I know that the tarot card is one, copycats can do it now, and then I don't know the validity. However, the issue is that when we create a concern, the public wants to know, what can I do? And then the question is, do I need to know what kind of weapon? If I see someone with a rifle bag, I'm calling. I don't need to know if it's a S-80 with a .226 or not. And the question then becomes, what needs to be public information in the public domain? What needs to be kept to at least give us an edge? And the reality is, I want you to notice something. The rate of the incidences are increasing, but the spread is spreading out. And that tells you something about the sniper. Incidentally, it's interesting enough, today I received a call, and a colleague, from a news outlet wanting to know, is this mirroring a video game? I mean, everyone is searching for what? This mirrors a movie. There's some explanation. Why is this going the way it is? And are there sniper clubs? And I mean, there are just a bizarre number of things.
Let me tell you what puzzles me about this, and please just jump in when you want to here. I mean, we're all speculating about this thing, and maybe shouldn't be, but we are going to. There have been a couple of reports that there may have been 2 people involved in this. Now, I've never heard of that.
Well, you know what?
I mean...
Now, think about this. This would mean something very strange. One, and again, now we can get into the notion of profiling. What you know, the FBI would say, this would make this a very strange situation if it's multiple parties. But one thing's clear, there is an alpha, as they say, sniper. There is the mastermind. The question would be transportation.
But how many serial killers have you ever heard of that worked in tandem?
Very few. Only in England.
Given that, plus the area they're doing it in, makes me think the T word, terrorism.
You know, that's interesting. And again, we're speculating.
Sure we are.
But there's a lot of things that people would say. If you look at the profile, one would say paramilitary-like in the mannerisms and the maneuvers. The fact that the person wants to be known, however, gives you another view of this. If it was terror, would they actually use English? If they were definitely related to terror, would they use God? The answer would be no. I mean, so, you know, I think there's a lot of things. The only question would be is, for the viewing public, what do you want to know? And then how is that managed in the law enforcement community when you're trying to narrow down.
You want the description, and they haven't been able to furnish one.
That's right. And again, the notion of all the different pieces. People are searching for angles, and you know, I guess we're trying to balance that with one, giving safeguards to people to try to go on with their lives. Yeah. You know, one of the things I can tell you right now, Mike Walker don't want to feel gas if I'm in the Virginia area. Yeah, but I mean, it's unbelievable.
We have to let it go there, but I might point out that one of the bizarre things that came up was there apparently is something in America called the Tarot Card Association, which was insulted.
Yes. And
issued a press release saying that don't associate us tarot card readers with murders because we take great offense at this. And if something like this happens, people come out of the woodwork.
Well, I'm sure the sniper clubs are going to come out as well. Now, there are sniper clubs. There are clubs that actually have competition and
play games at the people.
That's right.
We have to let it go. I'm sorry we do, but we do. Well, you never kick a man when he's down. That's what happened to Browns quarterback Tim Couch last Sunday. Fans booed his poor performance, then cheered when backup quarterback Kelly Holcomb took the field. Couch let loose in the locker room, and let's listen to what he had to say about the fans' performance.
You know, the next thing I remember, you know, the fans were cheering when I'm laying on the field hurt, and I think it's bull, you know, to be honest with you.
Well, now, I don't blame him for those sentiments, frankly. I've never been a football fan. I know you are, Mike, but, you know, when the Browns left, I could have let them stay because they mess up the town, they get loaded, there's all kinds of stories about vomiting on people and urinating on people. They behave like absolute rapscallions in the stands, and this is even worse than some of the stuff they've done before. Here you're booing your own guy who's got a brain concussion?
Well, first of all, you know, let me just be honest. You know, Tim Couch played at the University of Kentucky and played at the University of Florida, which is called the Swamp. First of all, he's going to be booed again, he's going to be booed often, and he's a paid athlete. First of all the fans didn't boo about or cheer for his injury. I was at the game with my father, and we were concerned about his health. First of all, people pay a ticket. I can talk about the Roman Empire and the gladiators. Yeah. The bottom line is that Tim is a player on a professional level. People are going to have their own opinion. You go and you play the game. And what I'm going to simply say is working people, or whoever pay, feel they can do whatever they want, and they're personally not injuring him, and that would be the concern. They didn't run out on the field, and whatever.
There is such a thing as sportsmanship, though. Isn't there, Congress? I mean,
that's an incredibly low standard to set, though. Yes, he's a paid athlete. He's also a human being, and
listen to me.
Just because
people
you pay your money,
when Ray Lewis got hurt,
that
and for the Baltimore,
right.
No one's saying it's right. I'm not saying. I'm just saying that his comments about it and about people's ability, it's not necessary. I mean, people are going to do all. Even when he's a hero, they're going to be booed. I'm going to tell you right now, there were people happy because he was replaced. I really don't believe people were concerned, were saying, oh, geez, I'm glad, break his arm and stuff. No.
Well, that's how he got replaced.
He got replaced.
Janet, bring some sanity into this.
I'm not surprised about his actions. He's, what, 25?
Correct.
He makes how many millions of dollars a year? He's not. He's pampered a bit. He's a bit pampered.
That's right.
And I think that it was both were at fault. I don't think that all the fans booed. A certain section of them did, and then the others became enthralled in the moment. Maybe they joined in the booing. But I do think that Couch's reaction to it was also immature. But it's expected. It's it's kind of expected in an athlete these days.
Well, Emily Post though wouldn't much condone the actions of our fans.
No, and you know what? The fans are probably wrong.
Everything but hanging.
Okay, all right, now wait a minute.
Think of Brett Favre and John Elway. Weren't they bad? Quarterbacks in the beginning?
First of all, let's don't confuse civility. Okay, first of all, listen, he was by the dog pound. My goodness, let's understand something.
It wasn't the dog pound.
They were not. They're the most loyal fans in the stadium.
It was the other side.
Exactly. They're high-priced seats. Okay, they get to drink longer, and we can talk about it. But the question is civility, and you're bringing sportsmanship in here. Look, we've lost some of that in this country overall. And the reality is I'm a person that believes that you don't boo, period, and you cheer people for their effort. However, in today's society, civility is gone, and you're going to see it, and he's going to hear it.
Well, you seem to be letting go of it rather blithely.
No, it's not the fact that
I gets paid a lot of money.
What I'm saying is, I think it's about maturity, and I'm going to say this. I think Common Policy said it very well, or Al Lerner's both have said it. I mean, the fact is he probably wouldn't have said it, and it's not necessary to say. People do foolish things, and those folks did a foolish thing. But the reality is that if he labored about it, he shouldn't. I mean,
he shouldn't have been at the news conference.
Absolutely.
That was the big mistake. He should not have been there. He was too fired up.
Well, right. I think that the dog pound, if we do a preemptive strike on anybody, I would say let's round up the dogs.
No, they're probably the best people out there.
And they didn't boo.
They didn't boo. But you know what? Every athlete's going to get booed, so let's just understand that.
Okay, all right. We got to let it go there. Thank you for the round table. Well, next week on this program, you'll see my exclusive one-on-one interview with Governor Bob Taft. What's next for the Ohio's economy? How does he plan to attract more high-paying jobs to the state? And what about funding for education? We discuss that.
If you're doing stuff that people didn't do before, it's hard to imagine how much grief you get. And so I think we related around there to start with. And our project started out, let's give them more grief. This is Cleveland, and let's see what we can do here.
And this is something the likes of which Cleveland has never seen before. The off-kilter, steel-wrapped, Frank Gehry designed Peter B. Lewis building of the Weatherhead School opened with fanfare this week. So the next time you're around the corner of Ford and Bellflower, prepare to be amazed. Cleveland businessman Peter Lewis donated more than half of the money to build it, $36 million to be exact. Lewis has had an uneasy relationship with the university of late. In June, he vowed to withhold future donations because the school, he said, was in free fall. During the dedication of his building, he challenged Case to make the Weatherhead School the best business school in the country. Now, Dave Barnett, you've been covering this project since the groundmaking in 1999. How's it gone? What's it been like?
It's been fantastic. First of all, I couldn't imagine, from the initial models and drawings that we saw, it was like I couldn't believe that they could make a building out of that. But it's fantastic. They did it, and only through computer-aided design is the only way they were able to do it.
Well, Steve, you know my taste in architecture. runs the Federal Reserve building downtown is my
fine building. Oh, it is. It is.
But what's your take on this thing?
Okay, well, I think it's a fantastic building, and it's probably the only thing in Cleveland that you can point to and say this is the absolute outer edge of what's technically possible in our society today. A building like this, as David mentioned before, would not have been possible without the most advanced computer technology. So it's a structural triumph.
Explain that. How does the computer technology play into this thing?
Well, it's very simple. What Frank Gehry did 10 years ago was to take computer design programs that had been used in the automotive and aerospace industries, and he was the first architect to apply this particular computer program to architecture. So it's the same system that was used to design the Mirage jet in France. It's the same computer technology. It's the same technology that's used to design what goes underneath the hood of a car. And he's using that now for architecture, as the first architect.
Why was that, knowing the kind of Luddite I am, as you do know, why was that necessary? Why did you need? What's the advantage, I guess, is what I'm groping for.
It's because
this is that kind of technology for building.
It was the only way that he could realize that he could build those wild forms that he's creating. And, you know, he's not designing on a flat piece of paper the way most architects do, or even on a flat computer screen. He's really not designing on the computer screen. He's taking models and then getting digital readouts of these three-dimensional models that are, you know, on the work tables in his office, feeding those into the computer and then tweaking them and playing with them. And this is the same way that jet planes and automobiles.
And it was interesting, too, for the construction crew, because a lot of the contractors had to invent ways to make this stuff. Like some of the columns had to go up at certain angles and stuff, and they had to find ways to cast them and to put up the drywall, you know, and some of them submitted them for awards and won awards in the building industry for what they designed here.
We've got some tape. I think it's about time we showed people what we're talking about here who haven't seen the thing. So let's put it up on the screen, and maybe you can describe what we're looking at, either of you or both of you.
This is the interior of the building. We're looking at the area outside the library, and those are wood panels on the right.
They call those like fish scales, like they mirror the outside of the building.
Right, right. And this is the main lobby area. We're looking at a mezzanine, and then down below is another lobby area. And you can see the light flooding in from skylights way above.
There's a lot of natural light coming in.
This is the central atrium in the building. And that thing with the round circle in it, that is another skylight that sends light into an oval classroom below on the building's lower level. And you can see there are no straight edges in the building. It's all twisted. In fact, Frank Gehry likened it to custard sculpture made out of custard. But this is what he wants to do. He wants to give architecture the movement and spontaneity of a work of art. And it's really now in the 21st century that this is technically possible for the first time. And it's great that we have it in Cleveland.
It's possible because of the computer?
It's possible because of the computer and the control that gives the architect and the contractors, the people in the field, to be able to do this.
And so the question became, as you were saying, David, here's what I can do on my computer screen. Let me see you do it out there on that site. That was the challenge. Exactly. We're going to see some. We'll just keep talking while we're showing.
Well, it's the data that's in the computer program, verified by surveyors on the site, that enables the architect and the contractors to put this thing together. There are virtually no straight lines in it, so it's very complicated.
I kind of like straight lines.
We were talking with one of the professors, Julia Grant is an accounting professor there, and given the problems the accounting profession has had of late, she said it helps her also think, as they say a lot of times with this building, out of the box, you know, because it makes you think different ways and not just channeled into this way of always doing things in one way.
I will withhold the temptation to remark that you're putting the accounting profession into a crooked building. we won't go any farther with that. But I shouldn't have said that much.
No.
But what is there an advantage? I mean, this is very pretty and very strange, very offbeat. But is there any advantage to people who have to use it? I mean, if you work in it, is there something about it that makes that better for you too?
Well, as President Edward Hundert said at the opening, he quoted Winston Churchill, who said, "First we shape our buildings, then they shape us." So the theory is that you're going to have more spontaneous interactions between students and faculty, that people will be thinking more creatively because they're going to be challenged by this environment that they're in. And it remains to be seen whether that's the case, but it's a very inspiring thing to have in our midst an example of the very latest creative possibilities in architecture and construction.
And some of the initial remarks we got at the opening this past week from the students and from some of the faculty members where they kept getting lost in the building. But they're saying that's an advantage because getting lost requires a kind of thinking that makes you think about what you're doing and not just grooved into go down the corridor and into a door kind of a thing. You have to kind of work out and solve a problem, so there's a problem-solving thing.
Yeah, maybe.
I have a little...
I got a bridge I want to tell you too.
I got a great building where you get lost and
there you
get out.
There you go. They're also saying they have to talk to each other so they can find their way. But
well, what about the relationship between Peter Lewis and the school? What's the
well, it's not that he's cut off contributions to the university. It's the entire city, and he's a major philanthropist. He's given over $50 million to causes in Cleveland over the past 10 years, and more than $120 million to maybe it's 175 to institutions in New York and on the East Coast. So this is a major loss if we lose him. And
why did he do this?
He did it because he feels that the university is not performing up to par. The university is crucial to the city's future. He wasn't being listened to in terms of his criticisms. After having given almost $37 million to the institution, he couldn't get a meeting with the full board of the university. So he says, okay, I'm going to cut off contributions to everybody because we have so many trustees who are members on different boards here. So I'm just going to cut off contributions to everybody. And that has gotten, at least gotten him some attention and maybe some changes happening at the university.
And by the way, he addresses this issue. That clip you showed up front is part of an interview that Dee Perry conducted with Peter and Frank when they were in town, and that's going to air on Applause on October 24th.
I'm glad you
a little
got
bit
that
of plug in there, yes.
I want to ask you a question on the Lewis withholding the funds reminds you of it, which is really off point.
Yeah.
But I heard an interview with you and Don Rosenberg the other day. I was dialing along. It was very fascinating. It was a great interview.
Thank you.
And I'm concerned about the orchestra.
Right.
I mean, for the first time, I was born in this town, and to get up a month or so ago, whenever it was, and read the headline saying that the orchestra is suffering a deficit, is there a general drying up of philanthropy in this city?
This is a very tough time for all the institutions that have endowments because they can't draw from those endowments the way they used to. Corporate donations are shrinking as well. And so it's a very, very tough time. And we may see some arts institutions fold. because of that.
Or even the Cleveland Museum of Art, which I believe has the biggest endowment in town, they're hurting. They're cutting back on stuff as well.
But that would be, I talk about body blows. In the bad old days, those were the two things we waved, or our flag waving.
Right, and yet they have this massive expansion and renovation that they want to get going. Something on the order of perhaps $200 million or more.
Well, anyway, you two folks who know more about this kind of stuff than I think that this is a great asset to the city of Cleveland.
Without a doubt. Yeah, without a doubt.
You'd like to see more of them.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
More great architecture.
It's really fun. I still have friends who say, what is that piece of junk? No, it's great. It's fantastic.
Well, it's better looking than the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
All right, and that, I agree with you. Absolutely.
That old thing rusted up there on the curbstone, I think we could well do without. Well, thanks a lot.
Coming up next at 9, it's Washington Week, followed at 9:30 by Wall Street Week. Then at 10, it's the weekly news magazine, Now with Bill Moyers, offering timely, relevant, and diverse perspectives on world events, issues, and ideas. It's all here tonight on WVIZ PBS.
Caring for a sick or elderly loved one is probably the biggest challenge any of us will ever face. Join WVIZ PBS Idea Stream for a special afternoon of local and national programming called And Thou Shalt Honor. Learn about the issues and challenges of caregiving and find out where you can turn for help right here in Northeast Ohio. Caring for those who care for others. Don't miss And Thou Shalt Honor.
Sunday afternoon at 3 on WVIZ PBS.
He's been called a visionary and one of the 25 most important Latinos in Washington. The former host of NPR's Talk of the Nation, journalist Ray Suarez, currently appears on the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer. Join him at the Ohio Theater at Playhouse Square, October 28th at 6 p.m. as he discusses his latest book, The Old Neighborhood, What We Lost in the Great Suburban Migration. For tickets, call 216-241-1919. A $10 discount for this town hall lecture is available to WVIZ and WCPN listeners.
Wine Lover's Dream, the Heinen's WVIZ World Series of Wine, presented by Anthem Blue Cross and Blue Shield. At the Grand Tastings on Friday, November 8th and Saturday, November 9th, you can sample over 400 world-class wines and delicious hors d'oeuvres while enjoying the ambiance of the Terrace Club at Jacobs Field. Call 1-888-281-WINE today to order your Grand Tasting tickets and also ask about the winery dinners and seminars, all part of the 7th Annual Heinen's WVIZ World Series of Wine. In less than a month, Ohioans will go to the polls to cast their vote for the state's next chief executive. What are the major issues facing our state, and where do the candidates stand? Two men who want to be Ohio's governor will face off in Dayton in a debate organized by Ohio's public television and radio stations and 3 of the state's leading newspapers. Before you cast your vote this November, be sure to watch Debating Ohio, the race for governor.
You're watching WVIZ PBS. Idea Stream. From our nation's capital, this is Washington Week. And now here's moderator Gwen Ifill.
The Congress speaks on Iraq, and the American public responds. President Bush wins a big one, as both the House and Senate delay, debate, then approve resolutions authorizing military force in Iraq. How did it come together? And as the White House seeks to convince the United Nations and the American people of the need to act, who has been persuaded? What comes next? The president takes on organized labor, short-circuiting a West Coast port strike, an action with long-term implications for policy and politics. And with just over 3 weeks to go before the fall elections, races are tightening, increasingly too close to call. We take a look at the Tipping Point Senate. Covering these stories this week, Juliet Alperin of the Washington Post, Tom Friedman of the New York Times, Gene Cummings of the Wall Street Journal, and Karen Tumulty of Time Magazine.
Corporate funding for this program is provided by SBC Communications, committed to providing Americans more choices in high-speed internet access and working to widen opportunities in broadband technology. As providers, as people, we're SBC Communications.
And by Shell. 1 out of every 4 cars on the road has at least one underinflated tire, a leading cause of catastrophic blowouts. You can learn more about keeping your vehicle safe and on the road with safety tips from Shell. Count on Shell.
And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. This program was also made possible by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you. Here again is moderator Gwen Ifill.
Good evening. There was opposition. More than half of the Democrats in the House, nearly a quarter of the Senate. But still, the president's victory was overwhelming. The tough message he wanted sent to the United Nations Security Council, to U.S. allies, and to Saddam Hussein. 77 to 23 in the Senate, 296 to 133 in the House. The president captured the Senate by solidifying Republican support and winning over key opposition.
I will vote to give the president the authority he needs. But I respect those who reach different conclusions. For me, the deciding factor is my belief that a united Congress will help the president unite the world.
Is a Democrat or Republican war. We vote on this resolution in the same way brave young men and women in uniform will fight and die as a result of our vote as Americans.
In the House, the Iraq debate was no less vigorous.
There's absolutely no evidence that any thinking person could give that says we are in any danger from Saddam Hussein today. You're in more danger from the snipers running around in Prince George's County that we can't find.
Of crimes against humanity, Saddam Hussein has composed a scarlet chapter of terror. Our only responsible option is to confront this threat before Americans die.
So, Juliet, how did all this end up coming together?
Well, really, the key moment was when Dick Gephardt, the House Minority Leader, agreed to broker a compromise with Bush where they narrowed the definition of what was going to happen to some extent, obviously not narrowed enough for many people, but, you know, kind of restrained it so it was a little more focused on Iraq than creating stability in the region. And from that moment on, it was really clear that it was going to pass. Really, you know, what was surprising is that you had as many Democrats as you did voting against this resolution. People thought that, you know, it was going to pass with flying colors, which it did, but still the fact that you had more than half of the Democrats in the House and a sizable chunk of the Democrats in the Senate voting against it shows that people still had real issues with kind of the policy implications of letting President Bush have such broad discretion when it comes to Saddam Hussein.
Were there policy implications or backpedaling by the White House, I guess, one way to describe it, that changed people's minds? Did the White House soften? It seemed that they softened their approach and therefore got more people on board.
They did a bit, and I had Democrats say to me, for example, after Bush's speech, that they thought that he had kind of downplayed the idea of preemption, had been a little more moderate in his tone, and that really, you know, brought some people over.
Did the Republicans who voted for this resolution feel like they were voting for a war, or did they feel like they were strengthening the president's hand for diplomacy? And did the Democrats who voted for it feel like they were just getting a political issue off their plate so they could talk about other issues? In other words, is this really a vote for war?
Well, it is to some extent, although you're very right that people are motivated by different things. I mean, I would say that in terms of the Republicans, many people thought it was to support the president, although certainly people gave fairly strong speeches of why they feel like this is a moment to stand up to Hussein. I would say for the Democrats, I mean, they wanted to have this vote so it was over, but the fact that so many people voted against it shows that, in fact, there was a real disagreement about what's the best way to proceed. And, you know, for those who did vote for it, you know, there's a little politics mixed in, and then, again, some people who just feel like this is something we need to address now rather than later.
So, Juliet, where does this leave Dick Gephardt? He brokers the deal, and then he finds himself on the opposite side of two-thirds of his caucus on the most emotional vote that we've seen in a very long time.
Frankly, I think it's a bit of a problem for Dick Gephardt. I talked to Democrats all week who were furious. I mean, these people are angry. They feel like they were A, betrayed by Gephardt, and B, that, you know, they really attribute it to his presidential ambitions, which, again, he firmly says that that's not the case, but it really undermines his position as a leader because people feel like he might as well leave at this point. They're feeling dispirited about their chances in the fall, and I think that it wasn't a great week on that sense.
Well, Juliet, let's contrast that then, or compare it actually, to Tom Daschle. I was surprised that the Senate Democratic vote was as big as that one was, and he played a very different role than Gephardt did. Gephardt was very consistent, but Daschle seemed to be caught in between his caucus and the White House. How do you assess Daschle's role?
I get a sense that people are less angry at Daschle, feel like they weren't undercut because he didn't take his visible position. And, you know, I don't get a sense, for example, from the more hawkish members that, oh, you know, he should have been stronger, or for the more dovish members, oh, he should have been quieter. So I think that essentially, while he certainly didn't do that much to affect the vote one way or another, he doesn't have the same fallout as Gephardt, who really put his position on the line.
Let's break down the vote. Were there gender distinctions, geographic distinctions, political campaigning distinctions?
Most importantly, there were racial distinctions. Every single Latino member who voted against this. All but, I think, 4 African-American Democrats voted against this. So that really gives you a sense of what's going on in their communities. I mean, that was stunning. And then on the political side of, you know, every Democrat in a tough race, only 2 of them, Jim Maloney from Connecticut and Julia Carson from Indiana, voted against it. Every other one of them voted. And in the Senate, you had Paul Wellstone was the only imperiled Democratic senator who voted against it, although some might argue that he would have faced political fallout if he had switched his vote.
A different kind of political fallout, at least in Minnesota. Well, the president has won over Congress, but he may still have a little explaining to do to the American public. At least that's what Tom Friedman has discovered, traveling the country to talk about his latest book, Longitudes and Attitudes, Exploring the World After September 11th. So, Tom, just anecdotally, are Americans, the folks that you see as you travel around, are they on board with this rush to whatever it is that we're rushing towards?
They're not on board, Gwen. They're not also off board. I was out in Lincoln, Nebraska, and asked a Republican official while I was out there, tell me, what's the mood in your state? And he really captured what I think is the mood in the country, which is ambivalent. There is not, I think, in the great sort of American middle, a huge anti-war sentiment, but there certainly isn't a huge pro-war sentiment. Most of the people I talked to said to me, could you explain what this Iraq deal is all about? I mean, I think there's deep concern about the economy, deep concern about the stock market, and a sense like, I hear the president, I know this is serious, but God, I wish we didn't have to do this now, okay? I would say that people distinguish between the war in Afghanistan, which, had we opened the military up to volunteers, then millions of Americans would have volunteered because they understood it was a war of no choice about our survival. I think there is a perception out there that Iraq is a war of choice. It's actually a legitimate choice, but people do feel at some level there's a choice here.
But it's the kind of ambivalence in which people can be convinced that this is a good thing, or the kind of ambivalence in which it could harden into opposition.
Exactly, and that's why I think people could be convinced, and I think what will be very determinative of that is 2 things, Gwen. If we get UN Security Council support, and if we have more than 1 ally, or more than 2 allies, the British and the Australians. I think people are really looking for that.
Did you, in your mind, how do you see Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda? And, you know, in your interviews, what are you finding there?
It's really related to this public opinion issue, I think, in that, you know, to me, Saddam Hussein belongs to the world of what I would call deterrables. He's among those leaders out there who I would say love life more than they hate us. And for the last 10 years, we've been deterring him. What worries me, actually, and I think what worries a lot of Americans, are the undeterrables, the young men from 9/11, those who hate us more than they love life. And what is the issue in Iraq, to me, when you get to the issue of regime change, which is actually the thing that attracts me, at least as a columnist. I'm not as interested in the WMD issue because I don't really feel threatened by that. But why is the issue of regime change important? Because what has been the engine of all these undeterrables, all these young men coming, you know, into the world angry, is that they are produced by failing states. They're produced by a whole swath of states in the Arab Muslim world that are failing their young people, failing to deliver them an opportunity in a future that they want. And that is what produces the undeterrables. And so to me, if there's one appeal in this story, it is the argument of, can we take one state, Arab state, and actually help it become a more progressive, forward-looking, democratic society, so it's no longer an engine of undeterrables.
Tom, now that we are a year past September 11th, and how does it look a year out? How has it changed us as a country and us as the world?
I'll tell you what I feel and what I concluded in my book, and it's that, to me, when I look back at 9/11, and I still have to stop myself and say, did that happen? Did 19 young men actually get on 4 planes, plow 2 of them into the World Trade Center, 1 into the Pentagon, and 1 into a field of Pennsylvania? What they did was, to me, burst a wall of civilization. I mean, what is civilization? It's kind of a wall that holds back the worst. And they punched a hole right through that wall, and there's a jagged hole there now. And it's almost like we can see to the other side. And I think, what diplomacy and politics is all about is, how do we repair that hole? Because there's a kind of howling, wind on the other side, and I think it's really scary, as we see a little bit this week in Washington with what's going on here.
And what about bin Laden and the war against terrorism? What are people saying about that, and what's the...
Well, I think the hope is bin Laden is dead, and it's anybody's guess. My feeling is it's no fun being Osama bin Laden if you can't snub your nose at the United States, so there's probably more chance that he's dead than not dead. But I think a year after 9/11, what I find is that there's still a real emotional undertow out there. People walking around, maybe I'm just projecting myself, but with a pit in their stomach. Someone who got to travel a lot abroad for my book, I always traveled abroad and came home, and America was my cocoon. There was over there and there was over here. And since 9/11, and particularly this week in Washington, where we have this crazed sniper out there, driving to the studio here, the roads, I won't say they were empty, but I've never got here faster, Glenn. Yeah. And it's because I think that sense of what's over there is now over here. And there's
so no matter what happens,
undertow,
it could be Son of Sam or something domestic that we're used to, but people are always carrying in the back of their heads that it could be something far worse.
It's another guy coming through that hole, and I think that's what's really on people's minds.
Thanks, Tom. It's real interesting. Good book, too.
Thank you.
Iraq was not the only significant debate underway in the nation's capital this week. For the first time in 24 years, a U.S. president used his authority under something called the Taft-Hartley Act. He ended a labor standoff. The action, which reopened 29 West Coast ports, has ramifications for the political year and tells us something about this White House and its relations with organized labor. Isn't that so, Jean?
It sure is.
Yeah.
It's actually very mixed with the White House. When it comes to this White House and labor, they're pretty much trying to have it both ways. On the one hand, you have the White House reaching out to certain unions, the Teamsters, the carpenters. That gives the president a common man appeal. It might siphon off some Democratic votes. But when it comes to really important issues, policy issues, time and time again, we're seeing a pattern here where this White House rules against labor and pro-business. Last year, the president 3 times intervened in airline strikes to stop strikes against major airlines. When they came into office, they raked through the Clinton administration